They said you were too sensitive, too quiet, too intense, too distant, too strange, too rigid, too emotional, too blank. And then, not enough. Not social enough. Not outgoing enough. Not fun enough. Not normal enough. You were always almost, weren't you? Almost likable. Almost easy. Almost right. But somehow, never quite. You learned early on to look for signs. When people's smiles started to fade. When they shifted their weight during a pause in conversation. When their eyes flicked toward their phone instead of staying with yours. You didn't know what you were doing wrong. So you tried harder. Smiled more. Spoke less. Shrank smaller. And still, the world felt like it was rejecting something about you. Something invisible. Something you couldn't name. You told yourself it was your fault. That you were awkward, or broken, or failing at being human. But what nobody told you is this. Surviving in a world not made for your wiring requires more energy than most people burn in a day. And you've been surviving for years, maybe decades. You didn't know your nervous system was wired differently. You just knew that noise hurt, that change felt like chaos, that bright lights made your skull feel like it might crack. You didn't know it was sensory overload. You just thought you were weak. You didn't know routines anchored your world. You just thought you were obsessive. You didn't know you were autistic. You just thought you were wrong. For the first 2 or 3 decades of your life, you tried to earn belonging by suppressing yourself. You rehearsed your high before walking into a room. You played the same line in your head 6 times, practicing the tone, the smile, the posture. You watched how others laughed, how they stood, how they touched each other's arms casually like it meant nothing. You watched and you mimicked, because that's what masking is. It's not being fake, it's being desperate to be safe. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because everything inside you was already too loud. Because sometimes a conversation isn't just a conversation. It's 30 layers of decoding, tracking tone, tracking body language, tracking your own expression in real time, wondering if your hands look too stiff, if you're making too much eye contact or not enough. And all the while, you're trying to remember what you were even talking about before your brain went offline from overstimulation. But you don't say that. You say, totally. You say, no worries. You say, yeah, I get it. Even when you don't. Even when your head is buzzing like a broken speaker, and all you want to do is leave the room. And here's the part that no one sees. The crash. The part that happens after. After the dinner. After the group hang. After the meeting under fluorescent lights that felt like 1,000 pens pressing into your skin. You go home and fall apart. Not dramatically, just quietly. You lay on your bed in the dark and feel the weight of pretending. You cancel plans. You avoid your phone. You forget how to speak. You cry and don't know why. People say you're moody. People say you're withdrawn. People say you're too sensitive. But what they don't see is the cost of trying to seem functional. What they don't see is the exhaustion of reading 100 social cues per minute just to survive a single conversation. What they don't see is that while they were casually chatting over lunch, your nervous system was burning like a forest fire. And the worst part? You blamed yourself. You thought if you meditated harder, or got more sleep, or just tried more, maybe it would stop happening. But it never did. Because this isn't about effort, it's about wiring. You weren't failing. You were translating. Every single day. Translating your overwhelm into withdrawal, your pain into politeness, your confusion into silence. And people called it shy, or awkward, or antisocial, or too emotional. But they never saw what it took. They never saw the clenched fist under the table, the breath holding, the mental note-taking of every micro-expression in the room. way your body froze when someone touched you unexpectedly. The way your stomach turned at the sound of a beeping microwave, or a baby crying on a train, or a stranger standing just a little too close in line. You didn't even know that was part of it. You just thought you were failing again. You lived in survival for so long, you forgot what safety felt like. And then, maybe one day you heard the word autistic. Maybe someone suggested it. Maybe you read a post that felt too familiar. Maybe you took a late-night test online just to confirm that you were definitely not that. But you paused when you read the questions. You paused when you saw the patterns. You paused because, for the first time in your life, someone described the things you never had words for. And suddenly, it wasn't all in your head. It was in your wiring. You weren't weak. You were overloaded. You weren't broken. You were misunderstood. You weren't cold. You were protecting yourself. And that realization, it's a kind of relief that brings you to tears, but also grief. Grief for the years you spent trying to be someone else. Grief for the friendships you maintained by shrinking yourself. Grief for every time you forced a hug that made your skin crawl. Grief for the love you didn't think you deserved because you were too complicated. Grief for the child version of you who cried when the sock seam felt wrong and got told to get over it. Grief for the teenager who sat alone at lunch because group tables felt like sensory chaos, not because you didn't want connection, but because your body was already screaming. Grief for the adult who kept pushing, kept smiling, kept pretending until your body broke down from burnout. You weren't making it up. You weren't exaggerating. You were surviving a world that kept asking you to erase yourself. But now you know. And knowing doesn't fix everything overnight. It doesn't erase the trauma. It doesn't magically restore your energy. But it changes the story. It rewrites the shame. It replaces judgment with understanding. It gives you back your voice, the one you silenced for years, the one that says, "This is too much for me. I need to leave now. I'm not okay with this. I need quiet. I need gentleness. I need space." And the more you listen to that voice, the more you allow it to be real, the less you feel like you're faking your life. Maybe you've already started. Maybe you've begun saying no. Maybe you've started letting yourself leave the room. Maybe you've chosen stillness over performance. Maybe you've stopped explaining yourself to people who don't listen. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to believe that peace is not earned. It's your birthright. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to meet yourself. The version of you that was there all along, under the scripts, under the fear, under the exhaustion. The version of you that doesn't need to apologize for needing silence, or repetition, or softness, or structure. The version of you that doesn't need to be more normal, just more you. And I want to say this gently. If you've been feeling broken lately, if the pain hasn't made sense, if you've been blaming yourself for being too tired, too slow, too distant, this is why. Because you've been surviving for a long, long time. And surviving takes everything out of you. But now, maybe you don't have to survive the same way anymore. Maybe you can rest. Maybe you can rebuild. Maybe you can be understood, starting with yourself. You're not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not failing. You're just finally hearing your own voice again. And that is the beginning of healing. So if any part of this made you feel seen, even for a moment, then I hope you'll stay. Because there's more to say, and more of you to meet. Gently now. What would you like to hear next?